If you're a fan of the JGSDF, then this one is probably also one of your favorites. This is probably my second favorite vehicle in the JGSDF's arsenal after the Type 10. We're taking a step out of the Cold War era with the Hitoroku Shiki Kido Sentosha, otherwise known as the Type 16 maneuver combat vehicle. The Type 16 serves as Japan's modern fire support platform, but what does that actually mean for this vehicle? Tanks are also fire support for infantry, and IFVs like the Type 89 are, well, IFVs. So where does the Type 16 fit between the IFV and the tank, and how has it performed thus far? The Type 16 started its development in 2003 with one simple idea in mind: modularity. During that year, the Japanese MOD started their Future Combat Vehicle Program, or the Shourai Sorin Sentosha Yo program in Japanese. The goal of this program was to create a single vehicle platform that could then be fitted with different weapon systems in order to streamline and save costs in future development for the JGSDF. 4 weapon systems were designed to be placed on the platform, including a mortar, autocannon, anti-tank cannon, and an artillery piece. This program didn't go very far though, as it quickly proceeded to exceed its budget constraints and was cancelled as a result. However, of the platforms listed, the idea for a light combat vehicle, or LCV mounting an 105mm cannon, was kept on the table. The vehicle would have to meet a few constraints though, namely be IED and mine resistant, be transportable by air, have hydropneumatic suspension, and have a cannon that was able to mitigate its own recoil. Of these though, only these features would make it to the final production vehicle. Type 16 was originally planned to be a 6x6 chassis, but it was deemed an 8x8 would be more sufficient. Type 16 is also notably one of the only JSDF vehicles not to use an autoloader. The MOD believes that using manual loading will save on cost and weight in the long run, but critics argue it puts unnecessary strain on the crew. During this time of setting requirements, TRDI made several prototypes of the vehicle, of which the demonstrator was shown in 2013 to the Japanese MOD. The JGSDF was significantly impressed by what they had seen, and scheduled the technical tests to take place between 2014 and 2015. And if the vehicle performed well in these tests, the vehicle would be scheduled for service in 2016. As you might be able to guess, the Type 16 did in fact pass its trials. The MOD ordered 99 of these vehicles to be produced by the end of 2018, and in 2016 the funding was secured to produce 36 more vehicles to serve in the 8th Division at Kumamoto and the 14th Brigade at Zetsuji. As of 2020, 142 of these vehicles exist at a cost of 700 million yen each, or $5.1 million. To put that in another perspective, that's around half the cost of a Type 10. With the development history out of the way, what's the intended role of the Type 16? To understand that, let's remember what the JSDF had problems with in their previous MPT, Type 90. The JSDF believed the Type 90 was too overweight for Japan's infrastructure and too big for its urban environments. While the Type 10 fixes some of these problems, there aren't enough of them to replace the Type 90, and the Type 74 is outdated and decommissioned. It's also not an APC of any variety since it can't carry any troops. The Type 16, to give the answer, is meant to fulfill the same role that tanks like the Type 74, Type 90 did, or the Type 10 will, but with one extra caveat I'll mention later. In the interest of self-defense, Japan wanted a new vehicle that can rapidly respond to threats, faster than any of these other 3 tanks can, and be easily able to navigate Japan's dense urban environments. Furthermore, the Type 16, by virtue of its lower weight, can be more easily transported either via rail, ship, air, or its own power. The other thing we should mention as to why the Type 16 is procured in the way it is, we need to step back from its intended role into the doctrine it meets. What I just mentioned is how the Type 16 would operate if an enemy landed on Japanese shores. However, that caveat I mentioned is where the Type 16 is built first and foremost for, to counter a potential naval invasion from no particular power on the Asian continent. As such, having an 105 is more than sufficient to sink landing craft. And for those concerned about the Type 16's ability to face up to tanks, the golden rule to remember is that tank-on-tank engagements are rare and barely happen in a vacuum. Going back to the initial question, how has it performed thus far, given it hasn't seen combat? From the reports of Japanese tankers and officers, their general thoughts are about as predictable as you can imagine for a modern marine vehicle. The maintenance isn't as heavy as on a tank, and the modern systems are a big step up from what they once had. However, the best thoughts come from the troops who transition off the Type 74 or Type 90. According to these troops, switching to the Type 16 isn't a heavy learning curve, especially for the driver switching from a track platform to a wheeled one. As for the rest of the crew, despite being modern systems on a new platform, the operation of these systems is still relatively easy to understand and relearn. And that's where we'll have to leave this vehicle for now. The unfortunate side of covering vehicles that are still in service, especially with a country focused on self-defense, is that there isn't much to talk about its performance or combat history. So, I'll see you on the next one.